According to the directions, the purpose of this assignment is to experience building a project from start to finish. That means you're going to add 2 sprites. Each sprite will have different X and Y coordinates. Each sprite will have a different animation. You will have 2 shapes. Each shape will be behind one of your sprites, and each shape will be a different fill. So by the end of this project, you will have something that looks similar to this. The first direction says delete all of the blocks in the workspace on your code.org level. You don't need them for this assignment. So I'm going to go over to my code.org level. I'm going to click and drag to select all of my blocks. Then I'm going to backspace and check that step off my directions. Step 2 says use the animation tab to add 2 animations. Don't forget to name each one something short that makes sense. Image, I need to go to the animation tab, and I need to make sure that it has a good name. I'll navigate to the animation tab. I already have a tall giraffe, so I'm going to add a new animation, and I'm going to choose something else. Instead, I chose a hot dog and French fries, so I'm going to go ahead and rename each one something shorter so that it's easy for me to keep track of. Now that I've completed this step, I'm going to check it off and move on to the next one. The next step says create a sprite and be sure to give it a unique name that makes sense. So in the sprites category, I'm going to drag out a create sprite block, and I'm going to give it a unique name that makes sense. I'm going to start by creating my hot dog. Now I can check it off my list and move on to the next step. Next step says set an animation for your sprite. And I can see my set animation block here with both of my labels matching. So I added a set animation block to line 2, and I made sure that my labels match with hot dog in each line. There we go. Now that I've checked off my next step, I'm ready for the following step. It says repeat the last 2 for your second sprite, and I have an example here for a plate of food and a coffee. I went ahead and I added another create sprite block on line 3, and I named it FF for French fries. I also selected an animation from the drop-down menu on lines 2 and 4 to create my hot dog sprite and my French fries sprite. Now I can check that step off of my directions and move on to the next one. Next step says add a draw sprites block at the bottom of both of your sprites and click run. I went ahead and I added a draw sprite block to line 5. Now when I hit run, both of my sprites pop up. The next step is optional. It's asking me if my sprites are too big. You may have noticed that my hot dog and my French fries are both very large. So I'm going to go back to the animation tab. And on the animation, I'm going to start by navigating to the resize option on the right-hand side. I'm going to make sure both of these boxes are checked. And I'm going to choose a smaller number to make my sprite smaller. Once I click resize, this will lock it in. I'm going to do the same steps for my hot dog. Now that I've changed the size of both of my animations, when I hit run, they're much larger in my space. The next step says use your mouse to decide on new X and Y coordinates for each sprite. Remember, the center of the sprite is the plot point, and you can see that it highlighted the new X and Y coordinates. So I'm going to take my mouse, I'm going to put it where I want the French fries to be, and I can see down here at the bottom my X and Y coordinates pop up. I'm going to round those to 70, 70 and put them in my top line. Then I'm going to select different ones for my French fry. Now you can see that my sprites are in 2 different locations instead of overlapping in the center. The next step says add a colored shape behind each sprite. Each shape needs to be a different color, and I have some sample code below. Now I just need to decide, should my drawing blocks go at the top of my code or the bottom of my code in order for them to be behind these sprites. I went ahead and I added my shape blocks to the top of my script. I also changed my X and Y coordinates so that each shape would appear behind a specific sprite. And I messed around with my width and my height to make them a more reasonable size. At this point, you should notice that my example over here looks very similar to what I'm working on here. The difference is my sprites are different and my shapes are different. The final step says, click Share at the top, copy and paste the link as a class comment on this assignment. So over on code.org, I'm going to click Share at the top. And when I click this purple button, it automatically copies the link, which means I'm ready to go back to code.org and paste it as a class comment at the bottom of this assignment.